You're at a dinner party. The conversation is loud. The laughter feels forced, a sound that doesn't quite match the expressions of the people around you. Somewhere between the second round of small talk and the third polite smile that makes your jaw ache, you feel it. It's a physical sensation, a quiet, persistent pull toward the door. It starts in your chest, a tightness that says, simply, I cannot be here anymore. It's not because you're rude. It's not because you don't care about these people, but you realize that every minute you stay costs you something the room will never see. It's draining a reserve that doesn't recharge simply by sleeping. So, you wait for a break in the conversation. You make your excuses. You leave early. Again. And the moment the cool night air hits your face, the moment the door closes behind you muffling the noise, you don't feel regret. You don't feel the fear of missing out. You feel relief. Schopenhauer once wrote that certain people are born with a nervous system too attuned to the world's noise. That what others experience as healthy stimulation, these people experience as an invasion. Not because they're fragile, but because they process everything more deeply. The laughter, the expectations, the unspoken social choreography. For you, it all registers as weight. And so, you leave, not to escape connection, but to return to the one place where you don't have to perform. Home. But here's what most people never see. This isn't antisocial behavior. This is self-preservation. And if you've spent years feeling guilty for leaving early, for choosing solitude over obligation, for protecting your peace instead of forcing yourself to stay, you're about to understand why. To most people, a dinner party is an opportunity, a chance to connect, to laugh, to feel alive in the presence of others. They feed off the energy of the room. They leave buzzing, energized, ready for more. But for some, it's a performance, a carefully managed act where every word is measured, every smile is timed, and every moment of silence feels like a failure. They're not enjoying themselves. They're surviving, and the cost of that survival is steep. Schopenhauer believed that people with rich inner worlds often find the external world unbearably loud. Not just literally loud, though the volume is part of it, but loud in its demands. The constant need to engage, to respond, to be on. For someone whose mind is already full of thoughts, emotions, and sensations, adding the weight of social performance feels like carrying a second life on top of the one they're already living. And so they leave early. Not rudely, not dramatically, just quietly. They slip out when no one's looking, or they make a polite excuse, and they go home. And the moment they close the door behind them, they feel it. Relief. Pure, undeniable relief. Not because they hate people, but because they finally get to stop pretending. Here's where it gets complicated. That relief is often followed by guilt, because society has taught us that leaving early is a sign of weakness, of antisocial tendencies, of something being wrong with us. We're told that healthy people enjoy socializing, that connection is what makes life meaningful, that if we're not out there engaging with the world, we're missing out. And so, we internalize that message. We start to believe that the relief we feel when we leave is something to be ashamed of. But what if that relief isn't a sign of weakness? What if it's a sign of clarity? Think about the last time you stayed at an event longer than you wanted to. Maybe you told yourself you should stay, that it would be rude to leave, that you needed to push through. And maybe you did push through. But what did it cost you? How did you feel the next day? How long did it take for you to feel like yourself again? For many people, the cost of staying is measured in days, not hours. They wake up the next morning and their brain feels foggy, as if they're moving through water. Their limbs feel heavy. The simple act of answering a text message feels like climbing a mountain. They're irritable, sensitive to light, desperate for silence. It's a social hangover, and it has nothing to do with alcohol. It's the nervous system trying to rebuild what the night before took away. They spend the next morning in silence, recovering. They cancel plans. They retreat into their own space and don't emerge until they've rebuilt the energy they lost. And the whole time, they wonder if something is wrong with them. if they're too sensitive, too introverted, too different. But here's the truth. Nothing is wrong with you. You're just someone who knows the difference between solitude and loneliness, and that's a distinction most people never learn. Solitude is chosen. It's deliberate. It's the act of stepping away from the noise because you need to hear yourself think. It's the artist in the studio at 2 a.m., the writer at the desk before dawn, the person walking alone in the park with headphones on, listening to music that touches something deep inside. Solitude is where clarity lives. Loneliness, on the other hand, is the ache of disconnection. It's the feeling of being surrounded by people and still feeling unseen. It's the party where you're physically present but emotionally absent, wondering why you can't just enjoy this like everyone else seems to. And here's the paradox. You can experience loneliness in a crowded room and solitude in an empty house. The two are not opposites. They're entirely different states of being. When you leave a social event early, you're not choosing loneliness. You're choosing solitude. You're choosing the quiet truth of your own company over the performance of connection. And that choice, as simple as it sounds, is an act of self-respect. Schopenhauer also believed that the people who need the least from others are often the ones who have the most to offer, because they're not seeking validation, approval, or distraction. They're seeking clarity, and clarity requires space. It requires silence. It requires the kind of environment that most social gatherings simply cannot provide. This is why home feels like a sanctuary. It's not just a physical space, it's a psychological one. It's the place where you don't have to explain yourself, where you don't have to manage anyone's expectations, where you can exist without performing. And for someone who spends most of their social interactions in a state of heightened awareness, that sanctuary isn't a luxury, it's a necessity. Before we continue, I want to say this. If what you're hearing right now feels true, if it's putting words to something you've felt for years but couldn't quite name, you're not alone in this. There's a quiet corner of the internet where people like you gather, not to perform, not to prove anything, but just to exist in the company of others who understand. If that sounds like something you need, stay here. Let this be the place where you don't have to explain yourself. Let's continue, because what comes next is important. Let's go a little deeper, because what's happening here isn't just about preferring quiet over noise. It's about understanding the difference between connection and performance. Most social interactions, especially in large groups, aren't about genuine connection. They're about social choreography. You say the right thing at the right time. You laugh at the right jokes. You nod in the right places. And all of it is designed to make the other person feel comfortable, even if it means you don't. That's exhausting. Not because you're weak, but because you're doing the invisible labor of making sure everyone around you feels seen, heard, and validated, while you quietly disappear. Schopenhauer wrote about this extensively. He called it the burden of the social mask. He believed that most people wear masks in social settings, versions of themselves that are palatable, agreeable, easy to be around. And for some, that mask is so light they barely notice it. But for others, it's heavy. And the longer they wear it, the more exhausting it becomes. This is why leaving early isn't about disliking people. It's about recognizing that the version of yourself you present in social settings isn't the whole truth. And the longer you stay, the further you drift from that truth. Home is where you take the mask off. It's where you stop managing, stop performing, stop adjusting. It's where you can be exactly who you are, without explanation, without apology. And for someone who spends most of their social interactions wearing a mask, that freedom is everything. There's another layer to this that most people never talk about. It's the way leaving early changes how you see yourself. For years, you might have believed that you were the problem, that if you could just be more outgoing, more social, more like everyone else, you'd finally feel at home in the world. But the truth is, you were never the problem. The problem was trying to fit into a world that wasn't built for people like you. And once you realize that, once you stop trying to force yourself into spaces that drain you, something shifts. You stop apologizing for who you are. You stop feeling guilty for needing what you need. You start to see your solitude not as a limitation, but as a gift. Schopenhauer called this the joy of missing out. He believed that the people who could find contentment in their own company were the ones who had truly mastered life, because they weren't dependent on external validation, external stimulation, or external approval. They had everything they needed within themselves. And that's what leaving early is really about. It's not about avoiding people. It's about returning to yourself. It's about recognizing that the most important relationship you'll ever have is the one you have with your own mind, your own heart, your own sense of peace. But here's the part that's hard to admit. Sometimes, the mask becomes so familiar that you forget what your real face looks like. You spend so much time adjusting to others that you lose track of yourself. And when you finally get home, when you finally take the mask off, you sit on the edge of your bed in the dim light and realize how far you've drifted. You feel hollowed out, like you left pieces of yourself scattered across conversations you didn't even want to have. This is the real cost of staying too long. It's not just the exhaustion, it's the disconnection from yourself. And if you've felt that disconnection, if you've ever come home from a social event and felt like a stranger in your own skin, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Let me speak directly to you for a moment. If you've ever felt that wave of exhaustion wash over you after a social event, if you've ever sat in your car in the parking lot and just breathed for a few minutes before driving home, if you've ever felt guilty for feeling relieved when plans get cancelled, you're not broken, you're not antisocial, you're not missing some essential part of what makes a person normal. You're just someone who experiences the world differently. And that difference isn't a flaw, it's a depth. It's the kind of depth that comes from feeling everything so intensely that you need silence just to process it all. It's the kind of depth that allows you to notice things others miss. The shift in someone's tone, the weight behind their words, the unspoken tension in a room. You're not disengaged, you're over-engaged. And that level of engagement is expensive. Schopenhauer believed that people who feel deeply are often misunderstood by a world that values surface-level engagement over internal richness. To the outside world, these people might seem cold, distant, or uninterested, but internally, they're processing everything. Every conversation, every facial expression, every shift in energy. They're not disengaged, they're over-engaged, and that level of engagement is exhausting. This is why leaving early isn't about avoiding people. It's about preserving the self. It's about recognizing that your energy is finite, that your peace is valuable, and that you don't owe anyone access to your inner world just because they expect it. There's a specific moment that happens when you leave a social event early. It's the moment when you step outside, into the cool air, and the noise fades behind you. For a few seconds, you just stand there, and in that silence, you feel something shift. The tension in your shoulders releases, your jaw unclamps, your breathing slows. Your mind, which has been racing for hours, finally begins to settle. That moment isn't relief from people, it's relief from performance. And that's the part most people don't understand. When you're at a social event, you're not just interacting with others, you're managing their perceptions of you. You're reading the room, adjusting your tone, moderating your energy. You're doing the invisible labor of making sure everyone around you feels comfortable, even if it means you don't. And after hours of that, you're not just tired, you're drained. This is the burden Schopenhauer spoke of. The weight of being too attuned to the world's demands. And for someone who carries that weight, leaving early isn't a choice, it's a survival mechanism. But let's talk about what happens after you leave. Because the relief you feel in that moment, the moment you close the door behind you and finally exhale, is often followed by something else. Guilt. A quiet, nagging guilt that whispers, "You should have stayed. You should have tried harder. You should be different." And that guilt is powerful. because it's not just your voice. It's the voice of every person who ever told you that you were too quiet, too reserved, too much in your own head. It's the voice of a world that doesn't understand why you need solitude to survive. But here's what that voice doesn't tell you. The people who stay at social events until the very end aren't necessarily happier, more fulfilled, or more connected than you are. They're just wired differently. They recharge in crowds. You recharge in quiet. Neither is better, neither is worse. They're just different ways of being human. And yet, for years, you've been told that your way is wrong, that you need to change, to push yourself, to get out of your comfort zone. But what if your comfort zone isn't a limitation? What if it's a boundary, a line you've drawn to protect something valuable inside you? Schopenhauer would argue that it is. He believed that people with deep inner lives need to guard that depth carefully, because the world is constantly trying to pull them outward. And if they let it, if they spend all their energy engaging with the external world, they lose access to the very thing that makes them who they are, their inner richness. This is why leaving early isn't a retreat. It's a return to the part of yourself that gets lost in the noise. A return to the clarity that only comes when you're alone. A return to the peace that you can't find anywhere else. And if you've spent years feeling guilty for that return, it's time to let that guilt go, because it was never yours to carry in the first place. So the next time you leave a social event early, don't apologize. Don't make excuses. Don't feel guilty. Just leave. And when you get home, when you close the door behind you and feel that wave of relief wash over you, let yourself feel it. Let yourself recognize it for what it is. Not a sign of weakness, but a sign of strength. The strength to know what you need. The strength to protect it. The strength to choose yourself, even when the world tells you not to. Because at the end of the day, the people who understand you won't question why you left early. And the people who don't understand you were never going to. You've spent years trying to explain yourself to people who will never get it. And maybe, just maybe, it's time to honor the part of you that knows, without a doubt, that leaving early was the right choice. You've spent years trying to fit into a world that wasn't built for people like you. And maybe, just maybe, it's time to stop trying. Not because you're giving up, but because you're finally choosing yourself. But here is the question that lingers in the quiet hours. If leaving early is an act of self-preservation, and if solitude is where you finally feel like yourself, what happens when the world keeps demanding more? What happens when the fear creeps in? The fear that if you stop performing, they will stop calling. The fear that if you protect your peace too well, you might end up with too much of it. That is the tension no one talks about. And it's the one that determines whether your solitude becomes a sanctuary or a prison. We'll explore that next. A quiet corner of the internet for people who choose solitude over half-hearted connections.